June 6, 1944, D-Day. As the Allies are storming the beaches in the largest amphibious invasion in history, a group of light infantrymen are in the midst of a dangerous operation behind enemy lines that will be critical to the success of D-Day. The mission? To capture and defend two bridges near the Orne River in northern France, a crucial point in both the Allies and the Nazis' battle plans. Although small in stature, these bridges will prove immensely important in the battle for Northern Europe.
D-Day is the beginning of the end for the Nazis and pretty much hinges on these two small bridges.
It's got all the elements of a really cool secret operation, because it is.
This was a feat of daring do. It was a specific enemy target, and one, crucially, that had to remain intact.
But how did they get there, and how long can they hold out? June 5, 1944, just before midnight, only hours before the planned start of D-Day, 6 Horsa gliders towed by Halifax bombers take off from RAF Tarrant Rushden in Dorset, England. They are embarking on a mission that could decide the fate of D-Day.
The weather's bad, it's overcast, it's drizzling, it's windy. They got to be able to get behind enemy lines safely and in a stealthy manner.
Their mission is to capture 2 strategically located bridges, vital to ensuring an Allied victory.
If this early mission is detected, it could undermine the secrecy and element of surprise for all of D-Day.
The Allies aim to change the course of World War II, beginning with the liberation of France. With the invasion of Poland in 1939 marking the start of the war, the Germans are on the offensive. Hitler has his eye on France. This strategic location will provide a tactical base for air and sea attacks against Britain. In March of 1940, the Germans begin their campaign against France. The French army has been weakened by World War I, and France is officially under German control just 2 months later. Amidst German occupation, an elaborate resistance network is created by French patriots.
They're the unsung heroes of World War II. Men and women, regular people now fighting against Nazi occupation, belonging to organized resistance groups like the Maquis or Alliance.
These operatives are essential to inform the Allies of German activity in the area.
Aerial reconnaissance, at least at that time, could only go so far because we're talking about observing things from thousands of feet away. From very high up, there were certain details which would be available only to people on the ground.
By 1943, the tides of war are changing for the Germans.
This is not Germany of 1939. This is a nation ravaged by war. Allied bombing has taken a significant toll, and their resources are seriously depleted.
After a string of victories throughout 1943, the Allies regained territories occupied by the Nazis.
The more successes you have, the more you believe that you can continue to be successful. And so you tend to go to bolder and bolder actions.
The Allies formulate a plan to liberate France and bring an end to the war. Operation Overlord. 339 Allied divisions commit to this battle. Over 1 million troops in total.
Resources are coming from virtually everyone who opposes the Nazis. So you have Free French soldiers, you have Canadians, the Americans, the British, and you have assorted persons from a variety of occupied countries.
On June 6th, 156,000 of these men will attempt to land on the beaches of Normandy and what would become known as D-Day.
We're talking about the greatest amphibious operation in history, and there's no guarantee it's going to work.
The resource allocation for D-Day is like nothing else. There is no precedent for it, certainly not on that scale. It takes years in preparation.
156,000 men, 5,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft. This is going to change the course of the Second World War.
Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight Eisenhower draws up plans to invade 5 beaches on the coast of Normandy. paving the way for an inland advance on the eastern flank.
You are landing a force the like of which the world has never seen before. If you can't get them out from the beaches upon which they've landed, you've got a problem. You need to ensure you have your routes into mainland France. So you need to secure bridges out.
8 kilometers in from the Normandy coast, a bridge over the Caen Canal will allow the invasion force to quickly move east after landing. Another bridge just 470 meters east over the Orne River will provide a continued path inland from the beaches.
We have to hold the bridge so that the thousands and thousands of men and trucks and supplies can move their way toward Paris and ultimately Berlin. Secondly, we have to hold the bridges as a choke point so that the Nazis can't reinforce their overrun troops at Normandy.
Major General Richard Gale of the 6th Airborne Division is tasked with formulating a plan to complete this critical task. Gale selects Major John Howard to lead the operation on the ground.
Major John Howard is the pin-up of the so-called People's War. He is the guy who's climbed up through the ranks through dint of personal endeavor and military acumen. And he's a team player. He looks out for his boys. He's the man you want at the helm.
The initial plan was to capture the bridges using paratroopers, an idea that quickly falls by the wayside in favor of gliders.
Transport plane can come in and drop down hundreds, thousands of men, but they're like dandelion seeds in the wind. Where are they going to end up? A glider, on the other hand, you're all landing in the same aircraft in the same place. You get out together, you're still one unit. Not a minute is lost.
The glider is quiet, it has no engines, and it will be dropped off by a tug, that is a bomber pulling it, a fair distance away from where it's actually going to get to. But of course, a bomber makes noise, and the Allies had a cunning plan. The bombers continue on a slightly separate course and then drop bombs as if they're on a bombing run. And this, of course, was completely credible because that part of the coast was being bombed day after day after day in preparation for D-Day.
It's a really smart decision by the British and starts this chain of events that certainly plays out very famously on the beaches on the morning of June the 6th. But a lot was going on the ground overnight further inland. And it really does start with those 181 guys taking off from Dorset.
The force is comprised mostly of D Company of the Oxford and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry, the Ox and Bucks. They're reinforced by 2 platoons from B Company, plus 20 Royal Engineers and 12 glider pilots. The gliders will land southeast of Sword Beach, where the British landing force is due to arrive hours later. Once the bridges are seized and ready to be reinforced, Major Howard will tip off intelligence officers with the code words ham and jam. As they approach their targets, Major Howard in the lead glider recognizes the area from reconnaissance photographs and knows exactly what the German defenses are down below. At this stage of the war, the Allies control the skies and take every opportunity to take aerial photographs of potential invasion sites.
17 million photographs. Every gun emplacement, every bridge, every infantryman, every pole to prevent the landing of a parachute, each and every one was noted.
And of course, we're also getting information from agents on the ground, from resistance leaders, all putting together this picture.
Certain number of ways in which you can attack a bridge. The Germans set up all the defenses in order to prevent that.
They've got relatively formidable defensive positions. They've got machine gun nests on both bridges. On one bridge, they've got an anti-tank gun.
Barbed wire and a trench system are set up around the bridges, manned by 50 riflemen and machine gunners. The 736th Grenadier Regiment of the 716th Infantry. This unit is largely made up of poorly equipped men from German-occupied nations, with some older Germans mixed in. The German soldiers have instructions to destroy the bridges if necessary, to stop them from ending up in Allied hands. At 7 minutes after midnight on June 6th, the bombers, towing the British gliders, cast off their lines in preparation for landing.
3 gliders are going to land next to one bridge and 3 next to another bridge, 400 meters away. So it's a relatively tiny strip of land that they've got to land in, and they've got to land one after the other in synchronized order.
Major Howard instructs the glider pilots to land with the nose right against the barbed wire. surrounding their assigned bridges.
You don't have as much control of the aircraft as you would with an engine. So it's a great challenge, particularly to do it at night.
In order to pinpoint this exact location in the dark, the glider pilots must execute the dangerous and risky task of performing a dive approach and pulling up at the very last moment, slamming the glider into the ground as smoothly as possible and hoping for the best. But as the glider landings begin, things don't go to plan.
And the very first glider with Major John Howard comes in and sort of crash lands. The good news is it crash landed right next to the bridge.
They were going too fast when they came in, and then the final violent stop, so violent in fact that the two pilots are thrown out of their seats and up against the windshield, and yet despite this, they land at exactly the right place. It couldn't have been more perfect. If you'd written that sequence of events in a novel, people wouldn't have believed it.
With the bumpy glider landing, Major Howard's seatbelt is broken and he bashes his head on the ceiling, rendering him unconscious for a few minutes and with a possible concussion.
When you're concussed, you're dizzy, headaches, sensory information, lights and sounds can cause pain that would make it very difficult for him to concentrate and very difficult to be efficient in his decision-making.
Despite his injury, Howard leads his platoon out of the glider. Two other gliders filled with infantrymen and engineers land nearby for the attack, all within 42 meters of the Caen Canal Bridge. If the Germans attack the gliders now, the loss of life could be catastrophic to the success of the mission. But luck is on their side. The German sentries, only meters away, disregard the sounds of the landing gliders, assuming they're hearing falling debris from a crashing bomber. East of the canal, the three gliders approaching the Orne River Bridge are not so lucky. Two of the three gliders land successfully, but the third glider takes a wrong turn.
This is the glider that contains Howard's second in command, Captain Priday, and this goes completely off beam.
Although he's missed his target, fate will hand Captain Priday a different role on D-Day. Meanwhile, at the Caen Canal, Major Howard's D Company troops rush towards the canal bridge. Leading the charge is Lieutenant Den Brotheridge, commanding the 1st Platoon across.
He wants to be first across that bridge. He knows it's going to be dangerous, but he's going to be the man doing it.
There are two German sentries. One of them manages to fire a flare, and then he's shot and killed. The other one runs.
As they continue across the bridge, Brotheridge and his platoon are attacked by machine gun fire coming from the far side of the canal.
And one of those bullets, sadly, goes through Brotheridge's throat, and he's mortally wounded.
Lieutenant Brotheridge becomes the first battle casualty of D-Day, but his men are so dedicated to seizing the bridge that they don't even notice he's fallen until minutes later. Brotheridge's platoon continues across the bridge to take up a defensive position on the west bank as the Royal Engineers search for explosive charges on the bridge and cut their fuses.
It's pretty much standard operating procedure that if you're assigned a key bridge like that, if you cannot hold it, you blow it up.
The engineers would have to come in and secure those explosives so that the Germans could not do that. It would have been extremely dangerous. When you're working with explosives, that any wrong move could potentially be set off, or the Germans could just go ahead and actually blow up the bridge if they were so inclined.
On the east bank, Howard's other two platoons clear bunkers and trenches with grenades and gunfire. The German defenders are overmatched. By 21 minutes after midnight, German resistance on the Caen Canal Bridge is over, and Major Howard's D Company, the Ox and Bucks, have full control of this critical throughway. Howard soon gets word that the nearby Orne River Bridge is also fully captured by his men.
Fortunately, the defenders to that bridge don't put up even as much of a fight as they do on the Caen Canal Bridge, and they flee before there's even a shot fired.
But a lone German soldier manages to survive the bridge attack and retreats to headquarters to inform his commander. Major Howard knows he's in for a tough night, defending these bridges. The Allied invasion of France is just hours away, and the Germans haven't got a clue about what's coming.
It was a nasty night. They assumed that nobody was going to land, and boy, did they assume wrong.
The Germans predict an Allied assault on France as early as 1942, but they are unable to predict exactly where and when it might be, so they bolster the defenses across the Western Front.
For the last 2 years, one of the great obsessions of Hitler had been reinforcing this Atlantic Wall, this extraordinary concrete fortification that ran from Norway right down to the Franco-Spanish southern coast.
That is a massive defensive structure. Thousands and thousands of landmines, thousands of machine gun nests, thousands of artillery.
In early 1944, Hitler assigned one of his best men, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, to improve the wall's defenses in preparation for an Allied attack. The highly decorated Rommel had earned the nickname the Desert Fox for his exploits as commander of the German forces in North Africa. The Germans suspect the attack will come at Pas de Calais, 350 kilometers east of the actual D-Day landing sites.
Ideally, you want the shortest crossing, and that was this crossing from Dover to Pas de Calais. So it was identified as being the location where the Allies would hit back at German occupation in France. And of course, we played to that presumption.
The section of the Atlantic Wall at Pas de Calais is strengthened with an enormous amount of concrete and steel, and the Nazis install 3 major gun batteries, pointing their 406mm cannons at Dover, England.
There were things called hedgehogs, wedged down into the ground with a sharpened spike at the top. The boats would have been hung up on the hedgehogs, which would have caused a massive water traffic jam and prevented the Allies from landing.
In the months leading up to D-Day, the Allies launch a massive disinformation campaign aimed at keeping the Nazis' attention on Pas de Calais. But the actual attack will happen in Normandy, and the first Allied troops are already on the ground. 30 minutes after the gliders first left for the coast of Normandy, the capture of the bridges is complete. Major Howard sends the magic words back to British intelligence operations, ham and jam. This signifies that reinforcements can begin to move in to bolster the troops. But one of the 6 gliders is still missing. Major Howard's second in command, Captain Purday, realizes that they have landed in the wrong place. The nearby bridge is not the one he's meant to capture.
First of all, they're let off in the wrong place by the tug, and then the pilot of the glider mistakenly identifies the Dives River as the location where he should be. Now, this group have now got a problem.
He's going to be feeling the level of anxiety. So he's operating in a vacuum where he doesn't know what's happening, and he bears responsibility as second in command for making it successful.
He has to make good. He's luckily used to having a bit of military authority. He's clearly got his wits about him. And he buckles down and secures a bridgehead on the Dives River.
Although this isn't Purday's original objective, he decides to capture the bridge anyway. The Germans put up a fight, but they're no match for Captain Purday and his men, and the bridge is taken.
This was a job that's actually been assigned to the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion. And once they've secured that bridge, they then begin to move back towards their actual location, which is Ranville and then those 2 bridges.
Around the time that Howard and Purday are securing their bridges, other Allied missions are beginning, paving the way for the D-Day landings later that morning. A 1,200 airplane assault heads to the coast of France to target the Atlantic Wall.
Where you send in the bombers in advance of the land invasion to compromise as best you can the German defenses. The more damage that you can inflict from the air, the more likelihood for success you have on that beach invasion.
The bad news is this terrible weather. There's a lot of cloud cover, which makes bombing really tricky at best. And of course, you still have anti-aircraft defenses, which the Germans are manning, which makes your life a little bit of a nightmare.
Meanwhile, at the Caen Canal and Orne River bridges, Major Howard and his men are braced for a German counterattack.
They need to hold them long enough for the 7th Paratroop Battalion to get there in time to reinforce them.
At around 50 minutes past midnight, the 600 paratroopers, led by Lieutenant Colonel Richard Pine Coffin, start to land in their designated drop zones east of the bridges.
They're expecting 7th Para to arrive within the hour, but of course, as is the way with parachute troops who tend to be dropped over a dispersed area and it takes them a long time to finally all meet up and then get on the march, that 1 hour is going to string into more like 2. So you've got this crucial period that can this small group of force hang on until the Paras come to their rescue?
While Howard is waiting for the 7th to show up, he gets a welcome visitor who had parachuted into northern France an hour earlier. Brigadier Nigel Poet is on a mission to set up a base in the small French village of Ranville. He was accompanied in his jump by a Pathfinder unit, a small advance force of paratroopers tasked with setting up the drop zones for the 7th. As Poet confers with Howard, they can hear the sounds of German vehicles in the nearby villages of Benouville and Le Port. If reinforcements don't arrive soon, they will lose their hold on the bridge.
What they're concerned with is what's going to happen if the 21st Panzer Division comes into play.
The Germans build some impressive tanks. The Panzer, the Tiger, the Leopard. These tanks are larger and much more powerful than what the Allies have. There were multiple battles where it would take 2, 3, 4, 5 Sherman tanks to neutralize one of these massive German tanks.
The commander of the German 716th Infantry is informed at 1:20 that the British are in control of the Orne River and the Caen Canal bridges, which are fully intact. To stop the Allies from encroaching, the commander attempts to order the 21st Panzer Division to defend the bridge landing areas.
Now, if you could have counterattacked, they could have probably reclaimed them, but they couldn't because of this very complex command chain going right back to Berlin.
One person has insisted no Panzer divisions will be moved without his order, and that, of course, is the dictator Adolf Hitler. He's asleep, and no one has the courage to wake him up.
We know that this person had bouts of anger and would lash out sometimes at the bringers of bad news. So, understandably, his staff was a bit concerned about waking him up.
Hitler's unwillingness to allow other people to make decisions speaks to a couple things. One, his just total ego, that he would not allow anybody else to do that. His also distrust of a lot of the people who were around him. Therefore, he had to be the one who made all the decisions. And ultimately, that was to the detriment of the German forces, because that is not a sustainable model for military decision-making.
Although the Germans are aware that the Allies may attack northern France any time, they have no idea that June 6 is D-Day. And as the weather has taken a turn for the worst in early June, they're led into a false sense of security. They were so unconcerned that Nazi commander Erwin Rommel, in charge of the forces in Normandy, is not even in France at the time.
He hops it back to Germany to give his wife a pair of shoes for her 50th birthday because he thinks that the weather simply isn't going to invite this unprecedented amphibious attack, and he gets it very wrong.
The German forces are left in the hands of lower-ranked officials.
If Rommel had been there, he may have ignored the fact that Hitler wasn't able to give an order or no one was prepared to wake him up. But he wasn't there, and his more junior commanders were not prepared to take that risk.
Although the German commanders are not permitted to order the panzers to move, they are able to move the support units assigned to them, and so begins the German counteroffensive to recapture the bridges. The 125th Panzer Grenadiers is ordered to assemble just to the east of the Orne River, to wait for further instructions. The 192nd Panzer Grenadiers is ordered to move in from the west, recapture the bridges, and attack the parachute landing zones. These troops don't have any heavy armor or tanks, so they are reinforced here by two other units, the 1st Panzerjäger Company and parts of the 989th Heavy Artillery Battalion from the north.
And they do have some armor, actually, and they eventually put together a small column of tanks.
The Germans head towards the bridges, but having had a few hours to dig in, Howard's men are ready for an attack, and they got a good bit of luck. One of the weapons at Howard's disposal is the Piat, a handheld anti-tank gun. As the first tank comes into view, one of the troops from D Company fires.
And incredibly, this charge explodes inside the tank and it blows up the ammunition. So there's an enormous explosion. And this so terrifies the Germans that not only does the rest of that column back up, they're now convinced that there's a much stronger force at the bridge with really effective 6-pounder anti-tank guns, which they don't have. and this gives the airborne troops crucial breathing space.
The 192nd heads back to headquarters in Bénouville to regroup. The German commander needs to assess the situation before attacking again. But the 192nd will return to the bridges. Having fought back the first attack, Howard and his men are relieved to see the first group of paratroopers from the 7th Battalion finally arriving at the bridge.
That's the moment where the squaddies, the ordinary soldiers on the bridge, can breathe the first sigh of relief, because most of the defensive heavy lifting from this point is going to be carried out by the 7th Parachute Battalion.
Sometime later, the regiment commander, Lieutenant Colonel Pine Coffin, arrives with more men, for a total of 200 men in 3 companies, fewer than 50% of the men expected.
Ultimately, a lot of those missing guys do trudge in later on, but it's all about getting the maximum amount of force into the right place at the right time so that they can take up positions and defend it against a counterattack.
The 7th A and C companies are positioned just outside of Bénouville, facing south towards the city of Caen, and B Company in La Poure facing Ouistreham to the north near Sword Beach, where the British troops will soon be landing. Howard's D Company is pulled back as reserved to hold the area between the 2 bridges. The 7th will bear the brunt of German counterattacks on the west side of the Caen Canal throughout the whole day.
You've got 200 paratroopers, so they don't have any big guns. All they've got are handheld anti-tank weapons and gammon grenades to stop an armoured attack. But you've got a potential force of thousands bearing down on you.
While the men at the bridge are busy holding off the Germans, 8 kilometers away at Sword Beach, the British begin their aerial and naval assault, targeting the German artillery and coastal defenses in preparation for the beach landings.
The landing on Sword Beach, as far as the Pegasus operation is concerned, is absolutely crucial, because this is where the relief is going to come. They don't know quite how long it's going to take for them to get through those defenses. So although they estimate they might be able to relieve the bridges by midday, possibly a few hours later, they don't know for sure.
The first beach landings in Normandy are only a few hours away. To ensure that the Germans have no idea where the actual planned invasion will occur, the Allies create one of the biggest deceptions ever carried out in military history.
I think one of the keys to the success of D-Day is actually this incredibly sophisticated and ultimately very successful subterfuge operation known as Operation Fortitude.
Operation Fortitude is a component of a massive disinformation campaign called Operation Bodyguard.
In order to secure the truth that the Allies are planning this massive assault for Normandy, they have to go through an elaborate series of lies to convince the Germans that the attack is coming at Calais. And it requires significant moving parts, a lot of details, double agents working for the British who have cover stories, and then all of those military assets.
To create the illusion of troops building up near southeast England, a phantom fighting force is created, led by American General George Patton.
We had intercepted a German communication saying Patton is the most gifted general, the one they're most afraid of. So they knew Patton was going to be the tip of the spear, the point that led the invasion. And Patton's fake army, it was inflatable tanks, balloons, wooden structures. It was like a Hollywood movie set.
In the months leading up to D-Day, decoy fleets of landing craft, simply painted canvases covering steel frames, are placed around the River Thames and other important waterways. Inflatable Sherman tanks are deployed and moved to different locations at night. Rollers are used to simulate tire tracks to keep up the pretense. To further ramp up the disinformation campaign, the Allies increase aerial attacks on Pas-de-Calais. They also hire an Australian actor, Lieutenant M.E. Clifton James, to pose as General Bernard Montgomery, the commander of all Allied ground forces. Dressed in one of Montgomery's uniforms, Lieutenant James, who bears a striking resemblance to the general, flies to Gibraltar and then Algiers, where he's sure to be spotted by German intelligence. It's hoped that the Germans will think Montgomery is in Africa. They won't be expecting the Allies to attack mainland Europe without him.
And we knew from our extraordinary levels of intelligence that, in fact, the Germans had fallen for our plan hook, line, and sinker. And those cannon, the Panzer reinforcements, the big guns literally on Germany's Western Front were pointing in the wrong direction, in the wrong place.
There were multiple divisions redeployed to Calais. If they had been deployed at Normandy, that could have changed the whole nature of the D-Day landing.
But ultimately, The success of D-Day could be significantly set back if the bridges come back under enemy control. This is now a strong possibility, as just after 300 hours, the Germans launch another attack. The newly arrived 7th paratroopers are facing an onslaught from a well-armed battalion of the 192nd Panzer Grenadier Regiment. As the battle rages, the 7th holds their own. But it's only a matter of time before the Germans receive permission to mobilize their panzers, and there's no way the 7th can defeat them.
Every time they rebuff a German incursion, it depends on the toll it takes on them. As long as the toll is light, then you're going to continue to feel a series of successes, and it's going to strengthen your resolve and make you feel like this is doable. On the other hand, they're also in a hyper-alert state that is going to wear on them. This leads to what's called operational fatigue. The longer you're on, the more likely you are to make mistakes.
As the battle for the bridges continues, French families in the dwellings dotted around the canal and river take cover in their houses. One such home on the west bank of the canal is Café Gondry, which is about to earn its place in history.
It's a cafe which has served as a bit of a refuge for the German sentries who go in there to take break from their sentry duty.
As soon as the fighting started, the cafe's owners, Georges and Thérèse Gondry, took shelter in the cellar with their 2 young children.
Monsieur and Madame Gondry are actually sympathizers. They are in touch with the resistance, and they've been handing over a certain amount of information.
The information that would be gathered in these types of cafes would be through the conversations that were taking place between the German soldiers. They were excellent sources of intelligence, and this intelligence would then be carried to the French resistance, who could utilize it themselves or transmit it across the channel to the Allies.
Not knowing who's prevailing outside, they're apprehensive when they hear a knock at their door. They're relieved to see 3 British soldiers. The Gondrys are eager to help the British liberators in any way they can, and the cafe is converted into an aid station as casualties are brought inside, away from enemy fire. Café Gondry becomes the first house in France to be liberated by the Allies as the beach landings begin. At 6:26, the Americans land on Omaha and Utah beaches. Their main objectives are to secure an 8-kilometer beachhead between Port-au-Bassin and the Vire River, and to take the Cotentin Peninsula to the west. The force at Omaha is expected to battle a single German regiment, but instead, they're up against the entire 352nd Division and suffer the most casualties of all the beach landings.
The way the German defenses were organized, one regiment would be in charge of this part of the Normandy coast, another regiment in this part, and so forth. Right where the Allies came ashore at Omaha, it constituted the division between 2 different regiments. So instead of fighting 1, they ended up fighting 2. But they somehow managed to come ashore and take the beach.
Having failed to recapture the bridges, the Germans try a new tactic.
The main hazard they had through the morning was from sniper fire.
But D Company fights back, ironically using a German weapon against them.
They bring the anti-tank gun into action and actually manage to knock out a water tower that they're convinced the sniper is hiding in.
D Company does their best to take cover from the snipers and maintain their positions, but they do suffer casualties, and the wounded are taken to Café Gondry. Thérèse Gondry is a trained nurse and works with the troop doctor to treat the wounded.
And you see this actually throughout France during the liberation. There's an excitement to help in whatever way they can, and certainly this is a great example of that, where she's there, she wants to assist, use her skills as a nurse.
But Café Gondry isn't the only thing to be liberated. Outside, Georges Gondry is digging up his yard, unearthing 90 bottles of champagne buried since the German occupation began in 1940.
We know from accounts of German occupation that they had a tendency to appropriate, basically steal, luxury goods. They certainly did not want the average French person to enjoy such luxuries.
If you're a French nationalist, what has happened from the time the Germans came in, that's not France. That's not French culture, that's not French life. And once the Germans are out, bring up the champagne, and it's sort of a symbolic acknowledgement that this is France again.
But for Major Howard, there's no time for celebration. He's worried about his second in command, Captain Perdey, and the other men who he now must report as missing in action.
The position of Pryday and the missing platoon is very hazardous because they're behind enemy lines, basically. You never know where the Germans are going to pop up.
After securing the bridge across the Dives River, some 10 kilometers east of their intended destination, Captain Pryday and his men continue moving, constantly checking their surroundings for the enemy as they head towards Allied headquarters in Ranville. As they push forward, they face enemy fire from the woods. To keep his men safe from the Germans, Captain Pryday leads them off the road.
It's waterlogged, they're coming through dikes and ditches, so it takes Pryday an awful long time to slowly but surely work his way to the bridges.
An hour after the Americans land on Omaha and Utah beaches, the British and Canadian forces are faced with choppy seas. At Gold Beach, the British 50th Infantry Division decides that instead of using tank landing crafts 500 meters out, they will run their tanks to the beach directly. The British secure a beachhead and take out the big guns in the area with relatively light casualties. But the Canadians, due to land at Juno Beach, will be delayed until 7:45. In the meantime, the British and Free French forces are starting to land at Sword Beach. The British 3rd Infantry Division is tasked with the assault. Fortunately, German fortifications at Sword Beach are lighter than the other landing sites.
The Allies were expecting barbed wire and an array of anti-tank defenses, which is consistent with the Atlantic Wall. Well, it turns out the Germans don't do very much here, but their fortifications need to be cleared and secured.
2 squadrons of Royal Engineers work to clear the beach, allowing the troops to penetrate the coastline. Facing moderate fire from German machine gun nests, the troops advance to capture the beachfront villas and resorts with little difficulty.
Fortunately, Sword Beach is the beach where some of the fewest casualties are taken by the Allied landing forces.
Success at Sword Beach is critical to Major Howard and his team, who are waiting for these troops to relieve them. The men at the bridgehead are able to hear the landing action from their positions, just 8 kilometers away from Sword Beach.
Can you imagine? It's a sort of festival of noise. And you're sitting there, bedded in a gun pit under a bridge, knowing that you're outnumbered by the enemy, hearing your own guys at sea in the air overhead, doing what they need to do to try and make sure your gains are going to be held onto.
Amidst the activity, 2 Spitfires fly over the bridges.
And they amazingly drop the morning's newspapers, which of course announce D-Day. It's extraordinary to think, isn't it? As they're making history, the news of that history is actually dropping down on their location.
With the quick victory at Sword Beach, the British troops begin their advance towards the Orne River and Caen Canal bridges. While the British are taking Sword, the delayed Canadians finally landed Juno. During the first hour of fighting, the Canadians face heavy resistance from the German 716th Division, suffering a 50% casualty rate, comparable to their American counterparts on Omaha Beach.
That stands out to me when I think about that day. Whose story ended on that beach for no other reason than they just happened to be at that place at that time, and the person who was maybe a foot or two to the right or the left, their story continued.
Once the beach is secured, the Canadian forces will move inland to capture the nearby seaside towns before pushing south into Normandy. At the time of the D-Day beach landings, Hitler is still asleep. None of his generals dare to reposition the Führer's troops without his permission. Vital hours are lost as the German Supreme Commander slumbers. The exhausted 6th Airborne Division has been holding the bridges for hours amidst enemy fire. At 900 hours, Brigadier Poet returns from Allied HQ in Ranville, along with Major General Gale, who had arrived in Normandy by glider just after 3 a.m. They brought with them the news that reinforcements are on their way, though it would be a few hours yet. Although cheered by the news, the troops defending the bridges suddenly have an unexpected and dangerous visitor. Plowing up the river from the Normandy coast, they spot 2 powerful German gunboats. All the victories and sacrifices that had been achieved could be wiped out in a matter of moments.
They don't have long-range weapons. They have hand grenades, and they have Sten machine guns, which have an effective range of only about 100 meters. So they can't hit the boat until it's close.
The lead boat gets dangerously close, but a weapon that had been successfully employed earlier is again put to good use.
And they open up on it, not with the anti-tank gun, which they can't swivel around to get into position to fire up the canal, but with a pier, this handheld anti-tank weapon. And it's a brilliant shot, goes straight through the wheelhouse, explodes, knocks the boat out, the boat kind of slews round onto the coast, and they capture the occupants of the boat.
As the Germans are marched off to captivity, the second boat turns around and heads back to the coast. The bridges and beaches remain in Allied control. But German opposition is ramping up.
If you're the Allies, you're thinking that you're in a very good spot. The Germans do have people in the area who weren't on the beach, who can certainly attack the beach or retreat and head inland and go to the bridges.
Just to the east, there are over 2,000 German troops waiting for permission from Hitler to attack. Other German threats are less than a day's march away. The 12th SS Panzer Division in the Lisieux and the Panzer Lehr Division in Chartres. At 1000 hours, the D Company men on the Canal Bridge face another challenge.
After holding the bridges all night long, turning away tanks, turning away infantry, dealing with snipers, in the sky, a lone German bomber appears. They have no weapons that can deal with this. And the bomber flies directly overhead and releases a bomb, and that bomb sails directly down and strikes the bridge.
This is a rare bombing on a day in which the Luftwaffe was mostly absent.
The head of the Air Force, Hermann Göring, grotesquely mismanaged the Luftwaffe in all aspects, and he fell out of favor with Hitler as a result.
The whole Luftwaffe, which was the pride and joy of the German armed forces at the beginning of the war, has been really eroded and depleted. The Germans just don't have the capacity to churn out airplanes like they did in the early stages of the war, and they also don't have the pilots.
With 1,000 ships at anchor off the coast and thousands of men on a beach, had the Luftwaffe come in with bombs and strafing with machine guns, D-Day would have been a bloodbath.
But bombs are still dropped. D Company and reinforcements at the bridge do their best to take cover from the incoming bombs.
Can you imagine their hearts must have been in their throats, all that work for nothing, and then that is gone, piff, paff, poof.
But with incredible good fortune, it hits, doesn't detonate, and bounces off into the water.
So now you've got a number of very lucky events. So it's going to be a big morale boost, but you still have a job to do. But now you start thinking that you're lucky, that you're going to succeed no matter what, that you can beat the odds.
Even while the Allies are attacking in Normandy, they continue their mission to convince the Germans that an even bigger assault is imminent at Pas-de-Calais to the east. To reinforce this subterfuge, Allied aircraft drops hundreds of dummy paratroops in the area.
We had what were called Ruperts, like a crash test dummy. They would fly over a part of Europe in a bomber, put parachutes on these Ruperts and throw them out the window.
And when they hit the ground, they would trigger off gunfire and crackers. They even landed special operations troops to play phonograph records to make it seem like you could hear their voices, and incredibly sophisticated. And this, of course, happened well away from the Normandy landings.
The Germans had spotters, literally from Norway down to Spain, and they would see this and radio back, "It's here." I imagine the Germans charging out into the field and holding up these little dummies with parachutes on and being duped time and time again by it.
Around 10 a.m., Hitler finally emerges from his slumber, greeted with the news of the Allies' amphibious assault. He's excited by this news, believing Germany can achieve an easy victory.
I think this is the success of Operation Fortitude. He's still not entirely convinced this is the main landing. So although he does give the go-ahead for some counterattacks, he doesn't order all the other panzer divisions located further north in the Pas-de-Calais to move towards the Normandy beachhead. And this, of course, is another mistake.
But unfortunately for Major Howard and his troops, around midday, the Germans mobilized 17 tanks towards the town of Bénouville.
Imagine being out on the road to try to meet them and seeing these multiple-ton, gigantic tanks with very thick armor and guns the size of a telephone pole headed toward you.
After hours of staving off attacks to hold their positions, the British 6th Airborne Division is exhausted and depleted.
Physically and emotionally, mentally, they would have been absolutely spent. And then you have 17 German tanks roll in. Must have been a very intimidating sight.
But although exhausted, the troops resolve to keep the Germans from retaking the bridges hold strong. As the tanks bear down on them, they manage, against all odds, to destroy the lead tank using an improvised grenade called a gammon bomb.
A gammon bomb kind of looks like an oversized gourd. It's like a bottle, basically. And it is a hand grenade at the end of the day. The difference is that it can be adapted to have an explosion that's small, medium, or large, basically speaking. For things like tanks, of course, you're going to pack it full of explosives and it can do sizable damage, and it does the trick.
The other tank gets stuck in a traffic jam behind the destroyed tank, giving the men the opportunity they need to attack the rest.
They somehow managed to neutralize 13 of the 17 tanks. So yet again, they managed to hold the bridges. It's a 1 in a million situation, but they did it.
And it's at this point that Howard is asked by the commander of the 7th Parachute Battalion if he will send some of his men back across the bridge to help bolster the defense on the west side of the Caen Canal Bridge.
While Howard's men are covering the bridges, the 7th push forward to the town of Bénouville and engage in house-to-house fighting to clear the lurking Germans occupying houses.
There were frontline soldiers who were billeted in French homes. That's what occupying forces do. The Germans used those towns as defensive networks and also to rig them, to line them up with explosives so that you hinder the enemy's advance. So these towns become really critical.
Just after midday, the German 21st Panzer Division finally receives permission to attack the Allied forces advancing from the Normandy beach landings.
The Germans are slow off the mark. If they'd been allowed off the leash sooner, they would have had a chance to drive all the way into Sword Beach and possibly beyond.
The 125th Panzer Grenadiers are ordered toward the Orne River and Caen Canal bridges, but they are easily spotted by British troops. To keep morale high at the bridges, Georges Gondry has a plan.
In a very French style, the cafe owner brings out the secret store of champagne to celebrate the Allied invasion.
Gondry hands out the champagne to the British troops. This gesture is well received, and many of Major Howard's men find excuses to get their free drink at various points during D-Day, amidst constant enemy fire.
Probably quite warm, you'd imagine. They've been sitting in the June soil. But anyway, any tipple, I guess, is welcome once you've been through a night like the 5th, 6th of June.
Major Howard and his men have been holding on for over 12 hours, but Captain Purday is still missing. Purday and his men continue onwards to Ranville, the location of Allied headquarters. On their route, they encounter elements of the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion and are invited to join their attack on the German-held town of Bavant. But Purday declines in favor of bringing his men to the bridges as strong as possible and completing his mission, although somewhat late. After swift success on Sword Beach, the British push further into France, dealing with pockets of German resistance as they meet them. The troops are now free to head towards the Caen Canal and Orne River bridges and the anxiously waiting soldiers. Their arrival at 13:30 is announced by the sound of bagpipes, played by Piper Bill Millen of the 1st Special Service Brigade, who had played his pipes constantly since arriving at Sword Beach.
I'm sure it was a very sweet sound for all those who were at the bridge to hear that and to have that signal that reinforcements were coming, but it also is a sign that what was happening at the beach had gone according to plan.
It's a bit of a taunt, saying we can do this because we're in control. We're going to keep these bridges. We're going to take back France. This is just the start of a whole series of dominoes, and everybody's going to be in a huge positive morale and a lot of happiness.
But the Germans still haven't given up. At 1500 hours, yet another gunboat approaches, this time from Caen in the south.
And they attack this with the anti-tank gun because that can swivel into a position that it can engage the boat coming up.
They miss their first shot, but the second round hits from over 200 meters away.
It knocks out this boat, forces it to turn around, but it just goes to show how vital the capture and therefore the counter-destruction of the bridges was for the Germans. They realized they needed to knock out those bridges.
Through the late afternoon and early evening, German attacks on the bridgehead taper off. Just after 2100 hours, as hundreds of British airplanes and gliders are flying overhead, dropping men and supplies, the 2nd Battalion Royal Warwickshire Regiment of the 150th Infantry Brigade marches in from Sword Beach. Howard hands over the bridges intact and secure.
They're finally relieved completely, and this is the moment where they can relinquish all responsibility for those two bridges and go into reserve in the town of Ronville.
And after briefing the new commander, Major Howard and his exhausted men are finally able to depart for battalion headquarters, a full day after taking off from England. When they reach Ranville, Major Howard is pleasantly surprised to see his second in command, Captain Pridet, who has just arrived after a waterlogged and woodsy trek from Varaville.
D-Day is an overwhelming success. There are objectives which aren't achieved on the initial day, that's for sure, and there are mistakes that are made, but it is the beginning of the end for the Nazis in Western Europe.
Over 150,000 troops arrive on D-Day, and by June 17th, over 500,000 soldiers are on the ground to push the Germans out of France and move inland to liberate Europe. A month after D-Day, the two bridges are renamed to honor the British, who held them strong throughout the long battle.
The bridge at the Orne is renamed for the gliders, and the bridge over the Caen Canal is renamed Pegasus for the logo on the airborne uniforms, and the road leading to them is now named for Major John Howard.
For his leadership during the capture of the bridges, Major Howard is nominated for the Distinguished Service Order and presented with a medal by Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery on July 16, 1944. The Gondrés continue to run their cafe, renamed Pegasus Cafe, to this day. Paraphernalia from the battle is displayed on their walls, including Major Howard's beret.
Pegasus Bridge is not as well known as many of the other stories of the Second World War, and yet it should be better known. The course of the Second World War hinged on the success and the incredible professionalism and determination of that small force of soldiers in capturing and holding that bridge.